Hello, Killjoys, and welcome to another episode of the Killjoy Guide, the Left Feminist podcast for the 99%. I'm your host, Killjoy Meg, and today we are going to be talking to a very interesting person about why she's not a feminist. So I think we'll get a different perspective and really get into some of the issues with feminism and how we can also improve the feminist movement. So I would like to welcome Jessa Crispin to the show. Jessa is the editor and founder of the online magazine Book Slut and the online literary journal Spolia. She is the author of the Dead Ladies Project and the Creative Tarot, and has written for numerous leading publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, and others. And she's also the host of the new podcast, Public Intellectual. So please welcome to the show, Jessa Crispin. Hi, Jessa. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so so we all kind of have an idea of where did your radicalization for feminism begin? And what was the moment where you decided, I'm not calling myself a feminist anymore?
Well, it began when I started working at an abortion clinic when I was 21. And I started volunteering for a funding organization for women who, because of whatever particular financial situation that they were in, could not afford to pay for an abortion. So they needed some financial assistance, whether that be just sort of strategizing how to find money in time, or if it was actual loans or grants. We gave out grants to pretty much everybody who called in real need. And so that's where it began. Because I was working with this pro-choice organization, Planned Parenthood, and I saw the gap between the lived experiences of the women that I was talking to at night on the phone, talking about, getting pregnant because they were raped, or being too afraid to ask their husband for money for the abortion, or whatever dire situation that a lot of these women found themselves in. And then this sort of self-empowerment rhetoric that was coming out of the Planned Parenthood organization as a whole, both in sort of a local level and in a national level. So that was the beginning of my understanding that things aren't working out the way that that the rhetoric or the sort of political campaigning or these very professional nonprofit organizations would have you believe. That the lived experience of women was extremely separate from this rhetoric of you can do it, and go ask your boss for a raise and pursue your self-empowerment and all these sorts of things. So that was, I think, the first moment when I realized that maybe sort of professional feminism or nonprofit feminism or just this sort of power feminism was not really even interested in, let alone aware of how women were living their lives.
Yeah, I definitely tend to agree with you on that. And I've read your entire book. So let me bring up the cover of that book. All right, so for those who can see this is the cover. The title is Why I'm Not a Feminist, a Feminist Manifesto by Jessa Crispin. So what was your impetus for wanting to write the book?
Mostly because, so I do feel like this came out in a very different era. And I know that it's weird to talk about 5 years ago as being a different era, but it truly was when we're talking about feminism. And so this was before the election of Trump. This was when still the left was essentially asleep under Barack Obama's administration. And when you had a book come out about feminism or an op-ed in the New York Times about feminism, it was solely under the vein of you can be a feminist and still shave your legs. you can be a feminist and still watch this pop singer who beats his wife and has been arrested for domestic violence. All of these sorts of
like that Jessica Valenti, Jill Filipovic type of rhetoric. Yeah,
like extremely shallow, extremely unintellectual, and again, very separate from the lived experience of women. Like what women actually needed in their lives and in their political representation, and just how to like think through living in a modern world, basically. So, so I wrote it from looking around and only seeing this very shallow engagement and this very sort of pop culture version of feminism that was being used primarily to sell commodities, whether those be, sodas, or T-shirts or records or whatever it was primarily used as a marketing strategy and not as any sort of sincere engagement with the issues. And I was very angry all of the time. I was just like, all of the time I was angry. So yeah, that's why I wrote it, to stop being so angry.
And I totally get that anger. I mean, that's definitely an impetus for, this podcast. Sure. And, for me, even going back to grad school, like I went back to grad school because I was like, this can't be what feminism actually is. I need to go in, I need to research, I need to talk about it more. And, like I really engaged to like, especially with like online feminism and Me Too and Yes All Women, because that's very much something that, spurred, a little bit of, like I was a feminist all through college, but that's really the thing that really got me invested in feminism. Kind of like the way that working in an abortion clinic was very radicalizing for you as well. It's like, but just as I went further and further in, I was like, okay, that's not the feminism that attracts me. Like, what is this feminism versus the feminism that I'm looking at? And I started like calling that more like buzzword feminism. Like, okay, you're using these terms as like buzzwords, things like intersectionality, empowerment. And I'm like, okay, do you even know what that means?
Right. Yeah.
Like, have you actually engaged with any of the literature that actually talks about what that is supposed to mean? Because they were just kind of using them as buzzwords. I could especially see it in media, especially like in TV shows, like, oh, you're toxic masculinity. Like, okay, do you even know what that means? Or are you just hearing it in media and regurgitating it?
Right.
And that's the thing that really frustrated me as well. And really maybe settle in like, okay, we have to actually talk about what feminism is versus what it isn't. And I loved how you ended your book of, if you're not up for actually changing the system, if all you're interested in is being comfortable and rising through the ranks, just admit it. You're not a feminist. Right. You're just using feminism for your own self-promotion. And that's something that I absolutely hate.
Yeah. Yeah. The imprecision of the language, I think, is one of the more frustrating things right now in, I think, all spheres of sort of social justice movements, right? Mm-hmm. Like that people use these words that have been tossed around in academia or in the media that is never clearly defined, and that everyone assumes that they know what it means. Everyone assumes that they know what toxic masculinity means. Everybody assumes that they know what patriarchy means or what capitalism means. But they don't really have, if pressed, a working definition that they can sort of turn to. And so it gets substituted, right? It gets sort of thrown in for a lot of different things. And so a lot of things that people talk about with with feminism is patriarchy. Like what they're describing is patriarchy, just with women in it. Or, so these sorts of things, it makes it very hard to have a conversation when you can't even have a shared understanding of what any of this means. And especially the word feminist, the way that it has been used to, sell something, but also to argue that we should be bombing Afghanistan, even more, the way that we've used it as a way to oppress trans women, the way that we've used it, in all of these sort of horrific ways. And so the way that it's been allowed to use it in that way makes the word essentially, I think, meaningless and useless, and can often be more divisive than as a way of understanding what we're talking about.
Right. And I think you had a great way of really framing this as, the fact that in order to make feminism more appealing to the masses, rather than actually going out and telling people, okay, this is what feminism is, they said, okay, we're going to make it as non-threatening as possible. Yeah. So, yes, you can still be feminism. You can still be a feminist and be fuckable. Guys, we're not a threat to you. This is not about men. This is not about, I'll still shave my legs. I'll still put on makeup. I'm not going to be threatening to you. I'll fit feminism into my lifestyle. And of course, when you fit feminism into your lifestyle, feminism is no longer a movement. Feminism is a brand. Yeah. And if it's something that you can take on and off, then is that really feminism? Mm-hmm. Now, and I think that one of the ways that you framed it, I'm trying to find it here, but I'm sure it'll probably take me a minute. But the way that you framed it as basically toothless, and it's toothless for a specific reason, because it's basically designed, particularly the bourgeois feminism that we're talking about, is that it has to be as close to the status quo that people can assume it and take it on, but it's really for their own self-promotion and their own rise in social mobility. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you see this with, I think, just about every social justice movement, right? At various points, you have these struggles for acceptance and equality that are met with tolerance or met with, barely veiled impatience. That, yes, we'll consider your concerns. Thank you so much for filling out the survey kind of attitude. And certainly you see that with the gay rights movement as well, the way that it's, gays are tolerated in a lot of ways, but it's only as long as you act as heteronormative as possible. So, yeah, I think that we're still dealing with assimilation. We're still dealing with participation in an oppressive system, but we're using the language of liberation and I think in a particularly kind of vile way in order to justify, going after the spoils.
Yeah, 100%. As you say here, and because you mentioned that choice feminism is very much an offshoot of white feminism, and I tend to agree with that. And you say, I say white feminism because many of the goals of mainstream feminism benefit middle-class white women, and also because those are the women who become and remain the most visible representatives of the movement. Many of the ideas that were floated as potential goals for second-wave feminism never found traction with the movement at large, because once you reached a certain level of money or fame, it would be more personally advantageous for you to fight for your own needs rather than contribute to a system that offered fairness for all. And I think that's a great way of framing it, is that it has become so atomistic and so individualized that any way that you do feminism, whether it's getting an abortion, whether it's not getting an abortion, either way it's a feminist act. Whether you're rising through the ranks or you're choosing motherhood, either way it's a feminist act. Doesn't matter what you do, because it's a woman doing it rather than a man, then it's feminist. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And basically when that's true, it means absolutely nothing, because, okay, so what is not a feminist act?
So so basically, throughout feminists' history, there's been two goals. And I think that this is true of essentially every social justice movement. You want liberty and you want equality. Liberty is much easier to give. And liberty is that freedom to buy liberation, right? It is, you are free to ascend the socioeconomic ranks. You are free to, pursue wealth. You are free to. And if it doesn't work out for you, like, that's not really our problem. So that it's always been easier to argue for and to get from the state liberty than it has been equality. Equality as far as, the ability to have an equal playing field, which, everybody talks about, but it's never existed in the history of mankind. That's the final goal of this, but we're also distracted by the money that we are finally allowed to have, and all the stuff we can buy with it. That's very exciting. And it will be until, the oceans take it away from us again. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of the insanity. I love the way that you frame that as like we're able to basically buy our way out of oppression. Because that's basically what it's become is, okay, how much money you have, even though you might still face a little bit of sexism, you might still face a little bit of racism, you're going to face a lot less if you have money and if you're accepted by the upper echelons of society. And so you are basically kind of buying your way out, or at least being in a more comfortable version of at least maybe exploitation. You might be a little bit more comfortable, and you may begin to say, okay, maybe this isn't so bad because at least I can have, that coffee. Maybe I can have that shirt. Maybe I can have that car, that apartment that I want, and I'll be comfortable, and that's okay. And so as long as I'm comfortable, then everything else, it'll sort itself out. And they kind of lack that sense of urgency that the people in the working class are really feeling. Because the working class, we're the ones who are really suffering day to day of facing homelessness. Because we know that the eviction moratorium will probably be up again soon. And people are going to have even more rent that they have to pay. Unemployment benefits just ended. We're going to be having student loans coming up soon. And so all these debts that people are accruing, they're going to be hurting so much more. So there's this lack of urgency from the middle class and the upper class, whereas the rest of us are kind of like, we need this now, please.
Right. I mean, this is how it's always been. You have nothing, and then you're given a little bit, and then all of a sudden you're concerned primarily not with making sure that everybody else gets a little bit, but just sort of increasing your own allotment. And I think that it's not great that the left in the United States is primarily run by very expensively educated, middle class and upper middle class urbanites. That's bad. I mean, it's really bad because they don't know. They don't know, and yet they feel free to volunteer to speak for people that have much less than them and who have much greater concerns, more urgent concerns, more material concerns than they do. I think it's extremely unuseful that we have continued to elect this particular population, this very small, privileged, and I hate the word privilege, but here it's accurate, privileged segment of the population to speak for the oppressed. All the more popular leftist podcasters and speakers and spokespeople are mostly white men. There are some exceptions, but those exceptions all went to Harvard or some equivalent university system. And they're all sort of like ready for CNN. They've taken their media relations classes. They have no ideas of their own, but they're free to pilfer from everybody else and speak it out in watered down ways and pretend like it's their own ideas. I think that the left is not just stagnant because it's been asleep for so long, but because the hierarchies of how power works, how the world works, are still replicated within the left unquestioningly.
How do you square that? How do you think that the left is really perpetuating a lot of those same inequalities? How would you picture that in your mind?
Well, it's always been the case. If you go back to the 1960s and the sort of birth of a lot of these feminist organizations, and I guess the birth of second wave feminism, but not just feminism, but also gay rights organizations, which at the time were called homophile organizations, Black Power organizations. They noticed at some point that the white men who were leading the leftist organizations were not taking their problems seriously. The left men that ruled sort of working class organizations did not see child care as an essential part of labor law. They did not see things like sexual harassment as being a difficult thing that might make employment hard for some people. Rape or sexual violence, domestic violence, they certainly didn't want to talk about for reasons that, we probably shouldn't talk about. But eventually they had to splinter off because they needed to fight for their own representation and their own sort of existence and their own needs. So feminists, and there are a lot of good documenters of that era and the fights that were happening within the leftist movement at the time. Ellen Willis is very clear about this. Sheila Firestone, and you saw other sort of demographics and civil rights groups splintering off for the same reason. White men were not seeing racial issues as really related to working class issues. They thought it was separate from class. It had nothing to do with it. That class was the only issue that actually mattered, and so on. And so this splintering continues today because within every splinter, the hierarchy, just replicated itself. And part of that is just because, who is the wider population going to listen to? A poor woman or a middle-class woman who looks like them? Who are they going to listen to? Somebody who says that all they really want is, access to these few small things like bank accounts, which women didn't have, or somebody who wants to reorganize the entire economic system of the entire world, right? So, of course, this happens, and it's inevitable. But it's silly that we're still here so many years later, replicating these same systems, and that when you try to bring this to somebody's attention, you're called, jealous. You're called as if I want to lead this. I don't want to lead the social. I don't even want to have a socialist revolution. Thank you very much. I don't. You're called jealous. You're called impatient. You're called attention seeking. And still, all the money, all of the attention, all of the power goes to this same small segment of people.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think that, it's interesting that you pointed out that, the leaders tend to be of a certain class, a certain type of whiteness, a certain appeal to the masses. As you pointed out, even in your book, Andrea Dworkin, who may not have been the most attractive woman, versus Gloria Steinem, who is a CIA-backed.
Yeah.
It
wasn't going to give Andrea Dworkin.
Beautiful,
are you kidding me?
Beautiful single white woman. Yeah. Who in her 40s or whatever, and it was like, oh yeah, she's appealing. She can appeal to the masses. Andrea Dworkin, Betty Friedan, not so much.
Well, Betty Friedan was a nightmare. Let's be honest. She's a total nightmare of a human being. So let's not pretend like she should have had any money. She got plenty of attention and power. That
is true.
She just didn't get the cold hard CIA cash that everyone was clamoring for. Maybe she did. I don't know. But she was definitely of the please shut up, poor women. I'm trying to get power. She was one of those feminists. So yeah. And she was
Betty Friedan.
Yeah. She was terrible.
She was basically shut up, poor women, shut up, lesbians.
She hated lesbians.
She was not very inclusive at all. No. But definitely I agree with you that there definitely seems to be a at least a view of feminism that, okay, this is for my self-betterment. And and the way that you frame it as basically we have to lean into capitalism. This is that lean in feminism. Oh, we have to lean into work, and maybe we can make a couple of tweaks to it. Maybe we can get a childcare in Facebook. Maybe we can get a women's bathroom. But overall, we have to lean into those patriarchal values. And I love the way that you framed that. We have to lean into those patriarchal values. We have to take on all those things, because if we don't, we're not going to rise up the ranks. Right. So they all go in with these good intentions of, once I get in there, I'm going to change the system. But in order to rise up the ranks, you have to take on all those patriarchal values. And therefore, you're really becoming the patriarch yourself. Yes. And that really reminds me so much of Mary Barfoot talking about escalator women, and basically how, within capitalism, we're Dick's sister. And if we want what he has gotten, then we are really upholding the system ourselves. So we're the ones who are just as much upholding patriarchy. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes. I'm agreeing with what I wrote. So, yeah, I don't know that. Now that I think about it, that's a little weird, but yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I like, though, that how you're kind of putting in a more layman's terms what Mary Barfoot said in her work. So I think I really appreciate that, because it is true, though, because that's the thing about intersectionality. Whenever people talk about intersectionality, really what they're trying to say is, oh, we need more diversity. Right. Yeah. But really what we're saying is, no, these systems are all interlocking. So patriarchy is capitalism. Patriarchy is white supremacy. Patriarchy is imperialism. Capitalism is imperialism. Capitalism is white supremacy. And it's all these things are all interconnected. And you can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other. So we all should be working together to get rid of these systems. Mm-hmm. Yes. I think that, though, very few people are sincere. Yeah. Right. Honestly, I mean, even within the left in the United States, I think there are very few people who want true equality. And I think that mostly what they want is sort of liberal social welfare programs reinstalled, right? They want their student debt canceled. They want healthcare. Yeah. And these are completely legitimate desires, right? I mean, they're almost silly. I lived in Europe for 5 years, and I still cry when I think about the health insurance that I no longer have since I came back to the United States. But essentially, if we're actually going to talk about removing white supremacy, if we're going to talk about removing capitalism and patriarchy, I think that most of the people that argue these points don't sincerely want to live in a world where they can't have capitalism because it works so well for them. And again, I think that this is part of the problem of having a left that is essentially run by people who are really good at capitalism. We don't necessarily in the United States have a radical working class, and we haven't for, about 100 years. I don't think that that's impossible to recreate, but I don't think it will happen necessarily within my lifetime. And I say that as somebody who grew up, rural Kansas. And I just, it's just not appealing to anyone there. And the conversations that I have with family members and people that I grew up with would, it would just, you would want to erase your mind after some of them. Yeah. It's just it's not on the agenda. And I think it's a little childish to argue for something that you don't want. And I know that they do it for hyperbole, and I know that there's some fantastical version. And also I think that they know that it's impossible within their own lifetime. So why not argue for it? But it does lead to what Natalie Wynn of ContraPoints called revolutionary ideation, which is this idea that I'm not going to participate in the world as it exists until it changes itself
for my own desires. I'm not going to participate in society until there is a revolution, until my needs are met. And again, that is quite childish.
Okay. I mean, so how do you view, because you definitely seem to have an opinion about, about like the way that people tend to idolize certain politicians and their rise in power. And like, oh, that is, we need to see that as success. We need to see that as, improvement. So I guess I'll ask point blank. Were you a Hillary Clinton supporter? Yes or no?
Oh, good God, no. No. Are you fucking kidding me? No. 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 In what version of the world could I possibly support Hillary Clinton for president? I mean, I voted for her, right? I mean, not in the fucking primary, but I voted for her against Trump because what else are you going to do? Like, you're just going to stab yourself in the chest 10 times? Like, no, you vote for the person who's least likely to start a nuclear war with North Korea. Like, when that's your baseline, you do what you can. But no, I mean, Hillary Clinton has always been a nightmare. I mean, back when they were bombing Kosovo, for fuck's sake, I mean, I'm old, so I remember that.
I'm sure you're not that much older than me. I'm only in my early 30s.
I'm in my 40s, honey.
That's not too bad. That's not too bad. But I honestly do remember that as well. I remember the fact that Kosovo and the Monica Lewinsky scandal were happening so close together. And I do remember the videos of the bombings in Kosovo. So, but definitely the fact that,
right? Yeah. I mean, Hillary Clinton admitted in her memoir that was how Bill got back into her good graces, that she was like, don't talk to me until you bombed Serbia, right? That was literally her condition for forgiving him. Wow. It's in her memoir. She thinks that's that's psychotic. Anyway, sorry, I could talk about Hillary Clinton for too long and I don't want to, but yeah.
But no, it's absolutely the truth though, that there's such people follow these politicians so closely and they become so latched on, their living history, it becomes our living history. I've read so many, there's one by Susan Bordeaux that Katie Halper, someone that I follow, kind of critiqued, but she was basically blaming millennial feminists for not voting for Hillary for basically everything that was going wrong. And okay, so you guys don't understand what sexism is because Hillary experienced all this sexism and she had to deal with all of this. I'm like, okay, you are latching way too close onto Hillary. You don't understand that we have our own shit to deal with. Hillary will be fine. She'll be fine. Okay, fine. She did not break that glass ceiling, but guess what? We don't want people breaking glass ceilings if everyone else is going to be left to clean up the glass and nothing else is going to change. And that's the big thing. It's if that's your goal, is to just rise in the ranks for your own self-importance, then that's not feminism. That's just your own self-importance. That's your own narcissism.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something understandable in it, in just that, there definitely was, coming out of the 80s and particularly, this idea that, of sort of corporate feminism, of the first, right? All we have to do is insert women into positions of power and then everything will become... Yeah,
the add women in stir, as Joan Scott likes to call it.
And so everybody is fighting to be the first of things, the first CEO of a Fortune 500 company, the first female senator, the first female president, whatever. And there's so much emphasis put on that it really was, I think, maybe just deranging for an entire generation of women. The late boomers, early Gen X, I think it really was, I think that feminism had failed them for so long that only symbols registered anymore, right? That the feminist project had been dormant for so long, so many decades, as anything other than corporate feminism or sort of self-empowerment feminism. It wasn't going to make abortions more available or affordable. It wasn't going to give us universal health care. It wasn't going to give us childcare. It wasn't going to, all of these things have been sort of the disappointment of the feminist project for about 20 years. Was really intense. And there was this idea of like, okay, well, then we have to build it ourselves. And so we have to get into positions of power and build it ourselves. It's just that it took people a really long time to notice that, hey, there are women in power and they haven't built this. Like, should we maybe take a different tactic? Maybe. But yeah, no, I think that it's sort of like understandable, but that doesn't necessarily make it right. And if you're still sort of touting that sort of that line in this day and age, I mean, that's not really forgivable.
Although, I mean, we've definitely seen the same thing, even surrounding like Kamala Harris. We've seen a lot of the same narratives about, around her, like this protection of Kamala Harris as, the first female vice president, first Black woman, South Asian woman as vice president. She must be protected at all costs. Yeah. And even on the left, there are a lot of people who feel that same way about a lot of the squad members. Like, oh, they must be protected at all costs. It's like, okay, but what about holding people accountable for their actions? What about putting pressure on our politicians to actually work for us? But people get so upset when you're yelling at politicians. And it's really strange to me that people are so protective of of these political figures, treating them like celebrities.
Well, it's parasocial. Yeah. It's everything that we engage with through a screen is our own little private fantasy. We build these ideas of like relationships with these people that have nothing to do with the reality of who they are. If people did it with Trump, people are of course going to do it with Kamala Harris. But if you actually sort of look at her record as a prosecutor, like it's a nightmare. And even that tour she did of Central America, where she like went around to all these various countries and was like, don't come, we will send you back. Like that was fucked up.
Oh my God, yes.
Like I was watching that just like, oh my, honey, what are you doing?
like you basically said the exact same thing as Trump. You said the exact same thing.
Crazy. But she's doing it in like a nice tone of voice. She's not calling them rapists as she does it. And so she's like the compassionate politician. But no, I mean, these are our elected officials. Like they are accountable to us. Of course, you should complain if they're not doing their job. I know that there's like so much about the squad because it's like, oh, look, representation, but it's really just a baseline of representation. They need to be doing so much more. I mean, my criticism of the squad is they're really good at representation and they're really good at rhetoric and they are not good at governance. I mean, AOC might be the exception to that. She's actually a very, very skillful politician. But as far as...
Which actually I'm going to push back on that because it's actually been shown that she's the least effective congressperson.
Well, I think that there are various ways of looking at the effectiveness of a politician. I think as far as coalition building and getting talking points into circulation and doing media relations, I think she's extremely good. I guess it's not that surprising to me that she would be rated the least effective. I'm guessing that's what are the grounds of that? Is that through bill?
I would have to look it up. I think but based on like legislation. Yeah.
I mean, that's not that surprising to me. But I think that there are other ways of being a politician that are important. And I think that for the most part, a lot of people just look at, are they saying the right things on Twitter? And that's not how you govern.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the thing I see a lot in the left circles that I participate in, is that it's much more of like, okay, stop tweeting and get to work.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Twitter doesn't do anything. Like I know people think it does something. It doesn't do anything. It's just like a vortex that we just fill with our despair and our grief. Like, it's really bad for everybody.
I do tend to agree with that, though. I do see a lot of good coalition building that is happening in the certain segments, as we just organize a whole march for Medicare for All. And kind of speaking on Medicare for All, and also well, we can pivot a little bit towards like the Texas abortion ban, for instance.
Sure.
And that Medicare for All, I mean, one of the things that's in there is that it would get rid of the Hyde Amendment. It would make abortion, healthcare. And one of the things that I heard very recently that's kind of stunned me was that Planned Parenthood was against Medicare for All. And one of the reasons that people put out is because basically that would make them irrelevant.
Yes. No. Yes, that is actually true. Planned Parenthood is kind of a little bit of a nightmare, especially in the last 10 to 15 years or so. They laid off a huge amount of their staff during the pandemic, despite not being financially required to, and things like that. And there's been a lot of whistleblowers about the misappropriation of funds toward the executives rather than in services and these sorts of things. So Planned Parenthood as an organization, it takes up a lot of space within the pro-choice community that it absolutely does not deserve. But it's really hard to say anything. I wrote a piece about Planned Parenthood and I got hate mail for a very long time. And people feel really strongly about it because, for the people who work there, they're working there because they believe in this strongly and they're willing to put their body on the line for it. Right.
Right.
And then the people who have needed their services are grateful for those services. And so maybe they don't want to question whether they could have been treated like a human being while receiving those services or whatever. So I get it. I just think it's wrong.
Right. Because you even mentioned in your book that like something that Planned Parenthood and a lot of other abortion providers don't provide, I should say, is like counseling and other services of being able to make sure that they are ready to have an abortion, which, I mean, I'm obviously pro-abortion, that I believe that every woman who wants to have an abortion should have one. But definitely, I think it's very interesting that you pointed out in your book that we need to have that conversation of, okay, what exactly does it mean to have an abortion? Should we be talking about like what women are actually experiencing when they go for having an abortion? And I feel like that's part of a more reproductive justice conversation rather than a pro-choice versus pro-life conversation that I feel like we should be having. Yeah. Because there's so much more than just being pro-life or pro-choice. This is a nuanced conversation that needs to be had. Like, women should be allowed to have babies if they want to have babies, or not have babies if they don't want to have babies, and be able to parent those children whenever they do have them. Because so many women have their children taken away from them. And those are conversations we're not having.
Yeah, I think that, this is a very complicated issue, but I think that one of the things we need to keep in mind is that something around 80 to 90% of women who have an abortion either have children or will have children in the future. And so this isn't a conversation about women who don't want to be mothers and women who are maternal, right? So the way that Planned Parenthood and other abortion organizations treat women in their care kind of cavalierly, I think is bad. But also if a woman is in a situation that is difficult and complex and it's not clear 100%, I need to terminate this pregnancy. If there is difficulty with the partner, if there's difficulty with finances, if there's difficulty with other aspects of their lives, Planned Parenthood only is really interested in the 100%. If you're there at 100%, great. Well, I was going to do a gallows humor. I've been told that my abortion jokes are not funny. But But yeah, so what the right has done, and they've been very smart about this, is to create systems of care for vulnerable women. They create pregnancy houses where women can reside until they give birth. They create counseling sessions, which are, of course, skewed to getting them to keep the child and so on. So keep the child, continue the pregnancy. Sorry, I've forgotten every important lingo thing that got hammered into me over the years working there. So what we really do is if a woman needs taken care of, the right is going to do that for them. The left we do not provide those services, I'm sorry, except for a fee. So I think that that's really dangerous. And I think that is part of the reason why we're kind of legislatively in the situation that we are. It's hard to advocate for abortion rights because we don't have good language for it. We don't have a good moral reasoning for it. We sort of believe in a lot, for various reasons, that it should be made available, but we might be squeamish about it. And so it's hard to just sort of full-throatedly say abortion should be available for anybody who wants them. And not need, because I don't want to get into defining what that means. I don't want to have an argument about that, but anyone who wants them, and allow every situation to be complicated. And to take care of the people who are in these vulnerable places. So yeah, I'm extremely passionate about this. And what's happening now is not in any way surprising. And it's not in any way surprising, and it would not be surprising to me if Roe goes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm probably on the same train as you, is that I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's definitely unfortunate, and I do think that we need to be fighting back against it. But that's the thing that I'm seeing, and particularly on the left, is like nobody has like a clear direction of how exactly to fight back against what the right is doing. And like you kind of see like this deficit of understanding, particularly for Democratic leaders. It's like, okay, you say that you believe in being pro-choice. You say that you believe in a woman's right to choose. What are you doing to support that?
Right.
What are you doing to support it? Yeah.
We've allowed the situation to create itself by not
exactly. There's a lot of complicity.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I'm not surprised about this at all is because abortion is technically legal but inaccessible for huge parts of the population, right? Because of various restrictions that have been put in place. You can have to travel to another state. It is so expensive to get an abortion. It is outrageously expensive to get an abortion. And that is never talked about, except for with the Hyde Amendment. But like, that's also part of this like fantasy of like, oh, one day everything will be fixed and it'll be fine. Once we pass this bill, like, yeah, that's maybe a couple of years down the line. If that, like, what are we going to do for these women in the meantime? What are we going to do for these women who for several years now haven't been able to access the care that they've required? Yeah, I mean, I just think it's unconscionable what we've put into place and what we have allowed to happen with abortion rights in this country. We essentially have abortion rights for the rich, who can travel to another state or country in order to obtain the services that they need, and who can have a comfortable abortion as well, because you don't get pain relief for for most of the sort of bottom dollar abortions that you get, which are still $600, $700. And so so it sucks. So yeah, I mean, it's just sort of monstrous what we've done to women.
Yeah, 100%. And like I said, this isn't just like a right-wing thing. Like, just as much, the Democrats and the left have just as much complicity in it, because they have not been doing anything to fight back or to make abortion more accessible or more. So, yeah, I definitely agree with everything that you just said. And I do think that is a conversation that we need to be having more and more and more because it's not being had. But let's kind of steer back toward like someone that I also read a lot is Sarah Banaweiser, and she makes a great point about the fact that, you know, feminism, certain types of feminism, like the lean-in feminism, the corporate feminism, neoliberal feminism, however you want to call it, the choice feminism, a lot of these feminisms get circulated because they become popular because there's something about them, whether it's because they're corporate friendly or they're self-affirming, that make them more appealing to people. And so they're the ones that get circulated over feminisms that are more radical, as you mentioned, like the Gloria Steinems over the Andrea Dworkins. Mm-hmm. And, you know, those more radical, you know, maybe socialist feminisms or definitely for more radical feminisms that want to dismantle the system, they tend to be, you know, gloss over or just like, no, that doesn't exist. No, go away. You don't exist.
Yeah.
Let's hide you behind a curtain. This is the only feminism that we want to represent is that choice feminism. Even a pro-choice feminism, you could say.
Yeah.
And do you see that as more of a capitalist manifestation of feminism?
I don't know if it's necessarily capitalism related. I think it's just, I think it's very American. Mm-hmm. I guess those two things are interlinked intimately. Mm-hmm. But certainly I think we don't have a great intellectual tradition in the United States. We have academia and then we have everything else. And these two things do not blend well. There's a lot of resentment outside of academia for academia. There's a lot of fear that academia has for people who exist without its borders. So yeah, I think that part of this problem is like, how do you put ideas into circulation when there is mistrust, when there is no overlap or shared sense of humanity. And so you'll get sort of, you know, watered down versions. You know, every once in a while you get like a radical op-ed, but often that is to, if anything, like as an act of like sabotage. Like I'm thinking about like the defund the police op-ed that was in the New York Times about yes, we really do mean abolish the police. And I'm so terrible with names, and I'm very sorry that I don't remember the name of, I think she goes by Prison Culture on Twitter. And I only know Twitter handles. My brain has been destroyed by social media. But yeah, so she published a piece in an op-ed in the New York Times saying, no, we really do mean abolish the police. And that piece has been used by the right in order to paint the left as total wackos. And I think that was almost the New York Times' intention, because the New York Times is very much not interested in defunding the police. It's not interested in prison abolition. I mean, have you like the guy who runs the Daily, right? Like he took that picture and posted it on Twitter of like a homeless man in the subway and talking about like the downfall of society. It's just like, leave that person alone. Like he's trying to say, fuck you. So the New York Times is not interested in prison abolition. It's not interested in these ideas. And I think that it gave this idea and this writer a platform as a sort of target practice. And so that does happen, I think, frequently. That doesn't mean that good hasn't come out of it. I think it has spread some of these ideas within leftist groups and given them a sort of vocabulary to talk about this. But it's, I think, done as much harm as good, and not harm in the sense of like, you know, she did any harm, just harm in the sense of like, you know, the right uses this against
as a tool,
now.
As a weapon.
Yeah.
And I tend to agree with that, but I mean, I definitely think that it's important for us to definitely get that type of language out into the world, because especially things like defund, like something that we've seen is that that has become more popular once people actually understand what that means of, let's take away some of the police's resources and put it back into the community, things like housing, education, things that actually prevent crime versus just arming the police against, poor people. Right. Because poverty is very much something that contributes to crime. But of course, you never see, whenever we do talk about crime, you don't see people who are committing white-collar crimes. You very rarely see them going to jail. It's very much, crimes of poverty and crimes of survival that are the ones getting arrested. Or, of course, nonviolent drug offenses. Mm-hmm. Things that are not sorry, I lost my train of thought there for like 1 second. But, crimes that are not, crimes against humanity. They're just crimes of survival or crimes of poverty versus people who are actually committing crimes that are detrimental to society, like demolishing our housing system, mm-hmm. And doing all these different crimes like that. Like, how many bankers have we seen go to jail? 0.
There was one.
Oh, there was one. Okay.
Yeah, there was one. In the entire collapse of Wall Street, there was one who went to jail, and it didn't seem like he did that very much. If that was wrong. I mean, there was one.
Oh, so he was the scapegoat then.
Yeah. He was, I mean, there's always one, right?
Yeah, like, he was a Derek Chauvin.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I'm not saying don't write the piece. I'm just saying I think that we always need to be aware that these forums have their own intentions with us. And
they're not our allies. Yeah. They're definitely not looking out for our best interests. They're looking out for their own best interests. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And you can use them, mm-hmm. but it's hard. It's very hard, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure you're speaking from experiences that you have written for like the Washington Post and the Guardian and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I've learned my lessons. It's okay.
Oh goodness. But I definitely. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is where you talk about the difference between safety versus peace. Like safety, because we're seeing a lot of that with like, cancel culture, outrage culture, however you want to describe it. But this idea that we have to be safe from people's words, and that this has become a way of basically pushing people into the margins and saying, you can't say what you are saying, rather than actually fixing the causes of what they're saying. Like, we can argue about like Trumpers all we want and like them saying, fascist things, but why are they saying what they're saying? And people never want to address that. They just want to censor it. And there's so much censorship going on right now, and particularly on social media. Like, how are you feeling about all the censorship that's happening, particularly around things like, quote, hate speech, even the vaccines, like how there's a lot of censorship happening both on the right and the left.
Yeah, I think it's complicated for me because I don't come from the demographics of the people that, for the most part, are the most powerful on the left. I don't. I come from a rural environment, a very red environment, a very white and poor environment. Yes. I come from. I didn't go to college. So I don't have a university degree. I don't have, various trappings of whatever the fuck. I don't know. So, when people are talking about Trump voters and how you should shun Trump voters, that's like 90% of my family. Like, am I really expected to like cut out 90% of my family? I mean, I have like quiverful evangelicals in my family, so it's not like I'm giving a ding-a-ling like on your average Saturday night. I don't have anything to say to these people who only have babies, but for the most part, like, I don't believe in shunning, I don't believe in shutting people out from spaces and telling them that their opinions are not valid because they're not perfectly worded. Now, that does not mean that I believe that you can say hateful things without repercussion whenever you want. I absolutely believe that there should be consequences for certain behaviors. But for a lot of it, a lot of the censorship and a lot of the condemnation comes down on these very small choices of language. And for the most part, those choices have been made in academic spaces. And again, like it's not like they're calling the Lincoln Sentinel newspaper in my hometown of 1,200 people and being like, excuse me, these are the new appropriate words for these specific situations. Like, how are they supposed to know? I mean, they only know when I go home and I'm like, it's like, you can't say that anymore, actually. So yeah, but I also come from, I have a lot of friends in the comedy scene in Chicago, which is all like dirtbags and like really just horrible working class people. I love them so much. And all dysfunctional alcoholics. And they also, they don't use the politically correct language, So yeah, so to me, I have a much more sort of loose engagement with that, and it worries me when it becomes so easy to condemn, especially when we're talking about things that are so minor in nature. And I do understand wanting to be accommodated and wanting to feel safe, but when your safety interferes with other people's freedom, then we have to have a conversation, and it's not one way, right? And to just assume that everybody knows the rules in advance, I think is really foolish and very much a part of this sort of academia urban bubble that the left exists in this country.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, like, I have my bachelor's, my master's, so I've definitely been in those circles, so I definitely understand, where you're coming from, because definitely I was like there are some things I'm like, wait, so we're saying that we're saying this now, okay, and so I definitely understand where you're coming from.
Well, I think part of it is just like, people who are in these spaces where these conversations are happening, need to understand that their lives are extremely different from just about everybody else's. And I don't think that there's an understanding about that. And I think that there is this assumption that if their lives are different, that they're worse. That if you don't want to be in New York City, if you don't want to be in college, if you don't want to be a professional social media manager or whatever the fuck, that there's something wrong with you and you deserve the circumstances of your existence. And it's not just about politics. It's about the material existence of people. The fact that, having a college degree extends your life in this country because it means that you're not exposed to pollutants in the factory that you're working. It means that you're not exposed to the sort of coping mechanisms of despair because you don't have it. Right. So you're not going to die young of an overdose or because you didn't, break your knee at the Amazon warehouse. And so I think that we need to understand that it's not just about intelligence and it's not just about education. It is about how people are allowed to live and how much pain they experience in their lifetime.
Yes, 100. I definitely agree with that. Like, we definitely have to change the way we see value. And I think that's a huge part of it, is that your value is not in, whether you have a degree or whether you have this fancy job or whether you're, sleeping on the sidewalk. Like, we all have human value. We need to stop thinking that our value is only in our labor.
Yes.
Because very much that is how it's seen. Yes. And so, of course, what we're seeing now more, too, with all the precarity what's happening in the world, particularly with, the millennial generation and the Zoomer generation coming up, is that because, we're having come of age during 2 horrible recessions, depression. I don't even know if we're in a recession or a depression right now, because it certainly feels like it.
Yeah.
But, I know so many people my age who have, these fancy degrees, but have nothing to show for it.
Right.
Nothing. Like, I have a master's degree. I don't have a fancy job. I'm on a podcast and I'm a substitute teacher. you know? And
you will still live longer, and you will still make more money, even if it doesn't seem like it. And you will experience less pain. Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, you will have more community. 100%. You will, all of these things are related. And I think that,
100%.
Because we don't talk to people, we don't understand that people are living different lives from us. We assume 100%. that our situation is a baseline. And especially when, social media parades all these sort of luxurious lifestyles in front of us every single day, we assume that we're at the bottom. Like, So it's really, and I think this is one of the things that is so frustrating with feminism is that I don't know that feminism as its own thing has any right to exist anymore. Like, I don't think that there's really anything so distinctive or that feminism has to offer at this point that it shouldn't just be folded into a sort of larger leftist pursuit. The only thing to me that is sort of worth organizing around right now is the lived experience of lower classes. That's because that's where the pain's at. Like, you have to go where the pain is at, and you have to try to alleviate it. And it's not with Hillary Clinton. She's feeling no pain, right? Like,
right, exactly.
Just because you're a woman doesn't mean you're oppressed necessarily anymore, or that you can't escape your oppression or whatever. So, there needs to be some sort of understanding about what is worth organizing around and fighting for, or what are the aims that matter. And I don't know that just being a woman is enough anymore.
No, absolutely 100%. Like, we're not looking for, equal opportunity oppressors. We're not looking for, just women in corner offices if they're not going to do anything that's going to support the rest of, all of the rest of us women who are down at the bottom, just trying to survive.
Right. Yeah.
100%. And I want to quote something from your book here because I thought it was excellent. So, not telling the sexist joke does not mean the underlying sexism no longer exists. People just get better at hiding their prejudices. Making racial slurs socially unacceptable has obviously not done anything to create a less racist world, as evidenced by the brutal slayings of Black men and women by the police force. It's unlikely that banning all sexist jokes then will do anything to create a better environment for women. Quick fixes are not enough. Political correctness that is not matched with institutional change is ineffective. Disproportionate punishment does nothing but create resentment and fear. And I feel like that's something that we're definitely seeing, like with all this, picking on okay, you're an easy target because you're online. So let me pick on you and something that you're saying, so because you sound like a misogynist asshole. Okay, that might feel good in the moment, but that's only one misogynist asshole. We have an entire system that we need to be dealing with. And so picking on one person at a time isn't going to do anything. Like, we need to be taking on the system as a whole. And as you said, we need to be doing that as, a mass, movement of the 99%, however you want to call it, of working people. And we need to kind of get, I don't know how we're going to do it like that, but and I think that's one of the problems that we're having on the left is, okay, how exactly do we organize? How exactly do we communicate with people who are on the same level that we are? Maybe they may not have the same political views, but we need to be building coalitions in order to work together in order to dismantle the system that is oppressing all of us. And I think I see things just slightly different than you in that I still, I see value in the feminist movement and at least picking up the nuances of, okay, this is how this is oppressing women. But I definitely agree with you that it needs to be as a part of a much larger movement, because it's only by all of these movements coming together that we'll ever actually be able to make a difference.
Yeah. Do you know the work of Shlomo Sand?
I'm not familiar, no.
He's just an amazing writer, philosopher, historian in Israel. And I spent a very bad week in Israel. And then I talked to him, and it sort of made everything make sense. Because he talked to me about how the idea that Israel has about why it is oppressing the Palestinians is because they're not safe, right? That the Israelis are not safe. That once Israel is safe, once there's no violence whatsoever, then we can start talking about civil rights for the Palestinians. And I was thinking about that so much as how it relates to feminism and how much it relates to this idea that once women have enough power, once we have enough women in power, whether that be the president or whether that be in corporate positions, then we'll focus our attention on poor people, or, then we'll think about like actual abortion accessibility or whatever. Like, we just need to get, everybody, and by everybody, of course, it just means this very sort of small professional class, into the right place in order to, before we can sort of spread it out and give equal rights to all.
Yeah. If we're doing that, we're never going to achieve peace.
Right. No, but it never moves on from safety, because of course, there's never a moment where everything is safe and clean and pretty and in its right place. Like, everything is always fucked in some way or another. And so it just becomes this impossible delay. And I think that that's been the history of so much of feminism, particularly from the 80s and 90s, and the disappointments of that, and the malaise of that. And I think that because it didn't work for so long and wasn't really doing anything, and this sort of being told to be patient, being told to, wait for this day when actual help will arrive, I think it really did sort of do a lot of sort of psychological damage to the feminist movement that we haven't really dealt with yet. And I think that that's why we're so focused on these surface level problems of safety and language rather than the material conditions of how we live.
No, 100%. And kind of, using your Israel analogy is like, yeah, okay, you can be fighting for safety as long as you need, but in the meantime, we still have Palestinians dying from bombs. We still have, homes being destroyed. We still have, even in the United States, we still have tons of people going to jail. We still have people living in poverty. People are losing their homes. We're dealing with a climate crisis that is going to kill millions of people, probably. So, and that's going to displace people. So while you're busy, just putting people into power, we have actual problems that we're dealing with on the ground that you are not facing.
And it's also the language that TERFs use, right, against trans women. The needs of trans women are so different from the needs of women, and women have to be put in as a top priority for feminism, and then we can address the needs of the trans women rather than seeing
that's true. The gay movement too,
experience, right? Like, but it really is sort of, it's like, oh no, we're not prejudiced. We'll get to you. You just have to wait your turn. But of course, they're never going to get to them because you're never going to entirely eliminate domestic violence. You're never entirely going to eliminate sexual violence. We can create situations that greatly reduce, but there's always going to be some fucking psycho, right? Like, you can't eradicate.
You're always going to have a Ted Bundy.
You're always going to have like a glitch in the matrix that just sort of spits out some fucking person, right? So it's not reasonable, and it's not generous. And I think that if feminism does have a future, it has to be exclusively in generosity, because it's been very stingy, and it's been very focused on the individual and what I can get out of imperfect situation for too long.
Right, absolutely. And I tend to agree with you on that, is that it needs to be more of a humanist movement, 100%. Like, any feminism that exists has to be based in humanism. Yeah. And, making the human experience better. And the fact that we all need to be seeing each other as human beings and understanding that we all have particularly basic necessities that we all need, regardless of, our race, our gender, our sexuality, our nationality. We all need certain things out of life. And I think that's definitely the way that we definitely need to be moving forward as a feminist movement. So I definitely think we agree there.
Yeah, it's, the book that I just finished writing and the next book that I'm pitching are both about men. And it's been kind of a relief to think about men for a while. It's just like, oh, what about them? Like, I haven't thought about them in 20 years. Maybe I should give them a look. See what they're up to. It's not, there's not that much good, but some of it's nice.
Yeah. But I mean, speaking of men, you make a good point here, is that, any feminist movement that exists, we do have to be not, men are our problem, as you say, but they are a responsibility, that because we're all living under a patriarchy. And a lot of this toxic masculinity that we're talking about is not actually a problem with masculinity, but a problem of patriarchy.
Yeah. Yeah. And a problem with power. Yeah.
And a problem with power. Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that we need to be grasping with, is that, okay, if we're not making spaces for, as you said, we're making space for women in masculine areas, but we're not making space for men in feminine areas. And I do think we're seeing a little bit of a difference there in, regard to, the fact that James Charles can be, the face of a makeup campaign. Yeah. So we are seeing like symbolic changes in that area, but definitely we need to be making more space for men to be in feminine spaces, just as we're making space for women in masculine spaces, and changing the way that we see both masculinity and femininity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the pandemic obviously created a crisis in domesticity, right? Mm-hmm. In a lot of different ways. One of which was it really did reveal, I think, to everybody who's been blind to this for a long time, that the nuclear family cannot exist without the exploitation of others, right?
Absolutely.
Without the exploitation of, especially during the pandemic. I mean, even on a good day, you need childcare workers, you need domestic workers, you need, various services. I don't have children, so I'm sure you need some things. But you need plastic shit made in China. That it just it's not a self-contained unit, but we've been thinking of it as one. And so what the pandemic did was cut away all of these support systems and make it clear that the domestic family, the nuclear family, does not work. And you saw bad effects of that, including a rise in domestic murders, particularly for whatever reason. And I would love to see more writing on this, but obviously this is all just sort of brand new. It just happened, but a rise in sons killing their mothers.
Wow.
But you also
I hadn't heard about that.
Yeah, I think the study that I read was based in the UK, so I don't know if that is actually true about the US, but there was apparently a spike. Wow. And there has been an increase in domestic violence emergency calls in both the US and the UK. Obviously, there's been problems with schooling and education, and with women having to leave the workforce because their husbands didn't want to Zoom educate their child or whatever. And so it fell to the mother, because that's the sort of baseline gender expectation. So I think that this can lead to things like paternal leave, flexible work from home arrangements, childcare subsidized or provided by cities or companies or other various groups. Things that feminists have been fighting for a long time. And so now it is the opportunity to push for these things, because it's so glaringly obvious how necessary they are for just basic functioning of the family. But I don't know But yeah, you also see increased involvement with men in their families, and that's, sort of at least conversations about equal caretaking, and that's really lovely and nice, but it doesn't always work out just from a renegotiation of the relationship. You need something sort of systemic to back it up.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I would recommend a great book by T.T. Bhattacharya called Social Reproduction Theory.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Excellent. Because social reproduction theory is definitely, talking about all those things that you're referring to, is that care work is so much a part of it's an invisible part of our economy. Like whether it's healthcare, education, how we're raising our kids, like the fact that we are both a form of production, but we're also reproducing those workers as well, and caring for those future workers. And so social reproduction is so important, and the fact that we do push so much of that on women.
Yeah,
we really do. And that's been even whenever mothers are out in the workforce and they have enough money, guess who they bring in to take care of their household is other women. Yeah. It's very rarely that is passed on to men. Very rarely.
I mean, there was that whole influencer that got canceled because she admitted that she had domestic workers and was totally insane about it on Instagram. But yeah.
Yeah. And you do mention a lot that one of the ways that feminism needs to move forward as well is that we need to be reconsidering our relationships, and that especially in the system that we're currently living in, that power dynamic of men and women, like there will always be some type of imbalance, particularly when we're considering that marriage has always been an institution that is about women as property and children as property, and this idea of the nuclear family as property, and that we're all going to be now individuals within that. And that even when women are fiercely independent, their lives still eventually end up being, okay, how am I going to develop a relationship with a man, or even in same-sex relationships, we have that same dynamic of, okay, but one of you has to be more butch than the other.
Sure.
Yeah. You still have to maintain that heteronormative, power structure, even though you may both be women, or you may both be men. Like, we still have that idea in our mind, like, oh, one person has to have power over the other. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is reflected back to us every single day in our own families, in our TV, in our, and in the music that we listen to. Everything is sort of like gender school, right? I know that we like to think that we do, that we sort of entirely construct ourselves afresh. But no, I mean, we look to these things to tell us what are the parameters within which I should exist. And part of that is gender. And yet you can question it, you can break it, you can dismantle it. But enacting it with other people who are also have been going to gender school for 30 years is really hard, right? So everything has to be negotiated. Every sort of relationship changes you in ways that are both good and bad. Everything, when you're dealing with the expectations of others or the needs of others, everything that you have sort of constructed for yourself, what your idea of yourself, or your idea of your gender, or your idea of what it is that you want or need, it comes into conflict as soon as you talk to another person who is already sort of reading you one specific way. That has nothing that might have nothing to do with you and all of the work that you've done, right? So,
right, absolutely.
I mean, you can fall in love. You can spend all 40 years as a feminist, and then like fall in love, and then all of a sudden you're just like,
oh, now
honey, your socks. Do you want me to put them in the it's really hard because a lot
pick
of
up your own socks. Pick up your socks.
Yeah, or something else. Like, how many like leftist podcast girls ended up dating alt-right neo-fascists, right? Like, there were several. There were several, and they were like, "This seems fine. I can change him."
Oh God, I don't think I could ever.
No one can. It's impossible.
No.
But it's really hard. Like, you can decide something, and then your unconscious overrides it, and it doesn't mean that that's an excuse. It doesn't mean go date Richard Spencer. I hear his wife left him, so he's available.
Oh,
but yeah, like you have to understand the power that this training and messaging has over you, that it's easy to think it and it's very hard to enact it in your own life.
Yeah, that's very true. So you had mentioned though that you're from Kansas. So, and that is a fairly conservative area, which is quite ironic because that is that's the birthplace of the populist movement, as Thomas Frank likes to talk about. Yeah. And that, so Kansas definitely has a history, of having that populist movement as its base and be able to mobilize for, this material class interest. So what do you think it would take to get Kansas back on?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just that it had a populist movement, right? Like they had like a communist, feminist magazine called Lucifer for a long time.
Oh my gosh, I did not know this. I'm gonna have to look this up.
I know, like I was doing research about it, and I was surprised. Like I knew that Kansas had radical moments, but my God,
right? Like even Wyoming was the first state to let women vote. So like, there's so much from the Midwest that people don't realize. Like, they think, all the plains, this is all conservative area. Like, no, if you look back in the history, there is a very radical history in the Midwest that people don't want to recognize. Yeah.
No, I think it's not that I don't think that there's like some sort of radical potential in the Midwest. Like I know these people, they're absolutely insane. I do think, I do think, and I hate Thomas Frank.
Oh my God.
Like, his What's the Matter with Kansas book. Like I gave that to my father, and he read like the author bio and saw that he's from Johnson County, and he's like, Johnson County is not Kansas. It's the very rich suburbs of Kansas City. Like it has nothing to do with actual Kansas. But anyway, I digress about my father's opinions about things. But no, it's, I think that part of what has swallowed up the radical potential of Kansas in particular is the absolutely hideous agricultural policies of the United States government. And also the way that it's been taken up by corporate power and greed, the way that the land has been mistreated. And we don't have family farms anymore, hardly. We have a suicide epidemic of farmers in Kansas. We have a bankruptcy epidemic. We have people who are essentially in these never-ending contracts with these agribusinesses like Tyson Chicken that are impossible to get, that like start with debt and then are impossible to get out of. So you have people who are distracted by the material conditions of their own existence. They tend to be demonized by the left in general. And so, I mean, why would they? Why would they join the left? Like, Joe Biden's farming bill is a nightmare for farmers. It prefers corporate farms. It has very little aid for family farms and the bankruptcy. It has nothing for mental health services, which are so hard to come by in rural areas. And so, I mean, why would they vote Democrat? Like, to me, it's illogical that they would. And so I think when you have something like Thomas Frank, who's like, these people are not voting in their own interest. I go, yes, they are. Like, yes, they are. Like, it may not look like it to you, but because you think of them as like working class losers, but they think of themselves as CEOs and they operate as CEOs of these farms, whether, even if they're not making any money from it, they are a CEO, and the sort of Republican plans for agribusiness tend to be more beneficial. So yeah, I think it's silly the way that people talk about large populations of the United States when they have no idea. So yeah, that's I don't like Thomas Frank.
I'll make sure not to tell him that. Just kidding.
Tell him
if I ever have him that.
I've met him. I probably had too many martinis and told him once,
That's fun. Oh. But so, do you think it would ever be possible to organize people in Kansas outside of the political duopoly?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I think that's way more likely than to convert them over to the Democratic Party. I don't think it would even be that hard. I mean, just like really figure out how to re-strategize agriculture. And allow people to have power over their own lives, so that they're not sort of just endlessly trying to meet corporate quotas, and let them treat animals the way that they want to be treated. Like I've seen grown men who have never told their children that they love them, like cry over soil, right? Like the misuse of topsoil. I've seen men cry over that.
Wow, that's amazing.
Like these are, I know that there are greedy assholes everywhere, but for the most part, these are good people who do what they love and have done it for generations, and they are being prevented from doing it by corporate greed and by political maneuverings. Let them lead lives of their own choosing, for God's sake. I mean, isn't that what politics is supposed to be about? But it's just so mismanaged. Like the whole food system in the United States is a fucking disaster. But in particular, like agricultural businesses and corporations are, as far as I'm concerned, like the work of the devil.
I think that's very well said. Truly, I think that's very well said. And so I think we're getting kind of close to the end of our time here. So how do you think that a feminist movement should go forward? Like if you were to envision a feminist movement that you would be proud to be a part of, what would that feminist movement look like?
It would have to include widespread solidarity in a real way, not in a we found a Black person to be on our board kind of way, right? Like not just like silly displays of diversity, but real meaningful coalitions across not only demographics and classes, but also political positions. I think that is incredibly important. Seeing things that are not typically understood as being part of a feminist agenda, whether that be healthcare or whether that be agriculture, it's important to incorporate ideas into those sorts of ideas into our agenda as well, because everything, the entire system is organized.
For like 2 seconds.
It's organized for acquisition, and it's organized for manipulation, and it's organized for like sucking money out of communities and organizations and whatever. So redistribution, decentralization, these are ideas that I'm very interested in right now, and re-envisioning these systems that have been allowed to do whatever they want without question, whether that's the healthcare industry, which is, racist and misogynistic and uncaring and profit oriented, or, even entertainment, which is now just run by the media, is now just like legacy kids, like, it's where if you're the son of a banker, like you go to dabble.
Yeah.
Everything matters. Like everything matters. And so a really big project of imagination, I think, is the only thing that would interest me at this moment.
I love everything that you just said, and I think that's a great place to, end this discussion. It's been such a pleasure having you here. Like, I loved this discussion, and you're definitely welcome back anytime.
Anytime.
So please let my audience know, where they can go to follow you and support you.
Yeah, I mean, JessaCrispin.com has all the various things, podcasts and other writings and everything. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah. And again, so those of you who are listening or watching, so the book again, that way you can go and read it because it is an excellent read. That is Why I Am Not a Feminist, a Feminist Manifesto by Jessa Crispin. Definitely go check that out. It's a fabulous read. I truly enjoyed it, and I found myself nodding over and over and over again, like, yes, that's an excellent point. Yes, that. So definitely kudos on, it's such an excellent book. I'll definitely keep an eye out for your next books coming out, your next ventures. And definitely check out her podcast, Public Intellectual. All right, Jessa, it's been such a pleasure having you here. I'm going to put you in the green room for just a second. But definitely, thank you so much for coming on. It's been such a pleasure having you. All right, guys, so that is the end of the show. Please make sure to go to thekilljoyguide.com to support the show. And also, become a Killjoy. You can support the show on Ko-fi/thekilljoyguide or go to patreon.com/thekilljoypod for exclusive content, including shout-outs, our new book club that's going to be coming up. So you definitely don't want to miss out on any of that. So please help us keep this show sustainable. I appreciate you guys so much. And definitely keep an eye out for what's happening over at Fred Hampton Leftists, because, there's always something going on over there. So I'll see you Killjoys next time. Love and solidarity. Bye, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another video. See you Killjoys next time.